Genesis 21, an exegetical and biblical-theological commentary. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another deep dive into the Scriptures from Room Apologetics. Today we're exploring Genesis Chapter 21, a pivotal moment in the unfolding of God's promise plan. The 21st chapter of Genesis marks a monumental turning point in the organic, progressive unfolding of Walter C. Kaiser Jr.'s promise plan of God. After decades of anticipation, the specific promise of a seed through Sarah is realized in the birth of Isaac. This event acts as a historical and theological anchor for the covenantal narrative. It is not merely a localized family resolution. It is the miraculous initiation of the royal priestly line through which the Creator intends to reclaim the disinherited nations and restore the cosmic temple fractured by the rebellions of Eden, the Watchers, and Babel. Genesis 21 highlights the tension between human pragmatism, represented by Ishmael, and divine promise, represented by Isaac. It establishes that God's restorative work operates strictly according to His sovereign election and grace. Now let's walk through the exegesis of the chapter. Section 1. The miraculous fulfillment of the seed, verses 1 through 7. Yahweh visits Sarah just as He had spoken, demonstrating that the promise plan relies entirely on divine fidelity rather than human capacity. Isaac's birth to a barren woman past childbearing age serves as a profound foreshadowing of the ultimate seed, Yeshua, who would also arrive through divine intervention. The text emphasizes that God alone obligates Himself to fulfill the covenant, ensuring that the mechanism of redemption remains anchored in grace. Section 2. The fracture in the family, mocking and expulsion, verses 8 through 14. At the feast held when Isaac was weaned, Ishmael, now a teenager, mocked Isaac. This scorn directed at Sarah's biological child was too much for her to take, leading her to demand the expulsion of both Hagar and Ishmael. This posed a severe dilemma for Abraham, as sending them into the wilderness meant facing harsh conditions and the possibility of death. However, God allayed Abraham's fears and instructed him to listen to Sarah, reassuring him that Ishmael would not die, as God had already promised to make him into a great nation. Because Abraham was aware of this specific divine promise regarding Ishmael, he could confidently send Hagar and Ishmael away and entrust them to God's care. Section 3. Divine provision in the wilderness, verses 15 through 21. God's attentive care for Hagar and Ishmael in the wilderness of Beersheba demonstrates the expansive compassion of the Creator. While the specific covenantal line of the promise plan flows exclusively through Isaac, God's providential care extends beyond the chosen seed, fulfilling His word to Abraham that Ishmael would also be preserved and multiplied into a great nation. This confirms that Yahweh is an active, intervening God who honors His declarations even outside the strict bounds of the Messianic lineage. Section 4. The covenant at Beersheba, verses 22 through 34. The chapter concludes with a treaty between Abraham and Abimelech. This terrestrial interaction roots the promise plan in concrete historical and geographical realities. Abraham's planting of a tamarisk tree and calling upon the name of Olam, the everlasting God, stakes a localized physical claim in the land of Canaan. It prefigures the ultimate restoration of the earth as sacred space and firmly rejects any spiritualized escapism, anchoring God's redemptive work in the physical cosmos. New Testament appropriations. Later biblical writers organically connect the birth of Isaac and the expulsion of Ishmael to the continuity of God's elective grace and the nature of the new covenant. In Romans chapter 9, verses 7 through 8, the Apostle Paul explicitly draws upon Genesis 21, verse 12, to demonstrate that not all physical descendants of Abraham constitute the chosen nation of Israel. Paul's point is that physical descent from the patriarchs does not guarantee citizenship in the chosen nation, proving that divine election has been at work since the first giving of the covenant. In Galatians Chapter 4, verses 22 through 30, Paul utilizes the narrative of Sarah and Hagar to represent two covenants. He quotes Genesis 21, verse 10 to illustrate that those whose covenant status rests on the flesh, like Ishmael, will not inherit the kingdom alongside those born of the promise, like Isaac. And in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 17 through 18, the author of Hebrews emphasizes that Abraham's faith was anchored in the specific declaration of Genesis 21, verse 12, knowing that it was exclusively through Isaac that the promised descendants would be named and the promise plan advanced. Theological synthesis. Genesis 21 serves as a critical historical and theological node within the organic architecture of the promise plan. The miraculous birth of Isaac is not an isolated wonder, but an earnest downpayment of the Creator's relentless campaign to reverse the cosmic fractures introduced in Eden, the days of the Watchers, and Babel. The firm distinction drawn between Isaac and Ishmael establishes that participation in God's restorative work is secured by divine promise rather than by human effort or mere fleshly descent. Yet this text-immanent reality does not spiritualize away the concrete land-oriented promises given to ethnic Israel. Rather, it solidifies them. The specific election of Isaac ensures that the covenantal line remains historically intact, so that ultimately the Messiah might emerge from this root to inaugurate the new covenant, graft in the Gentiles, and restore the entire cosmos as the eternal dwelling place of God without displacing the irrevocable calling of the Jewish people. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of Genesis 21. If this blessed you, please subscribe, share, and leave your thoughts below. Until next time, keep pressing into the Scriptures and the promise plan of our faithful God.